Hello, everyone. Just in case you missed the disclaimer at the end of the last episode of Play, Watch, Listen, what you're about to watch is basically a special episode or a bonus episode. We ultimately recorded episode 37 for so long that I was able to split the show into two parts, and it also kind of makes sense because there are such different topics. Part 1 is very much still about video games. Part 2, which you're about to watch or listen to, is almost entirely about politics. So just wanted to give everyone the heads up. Episode 38 is still planned to publish on Friday. This is ultimately just an extra bonus episode of the show. So enjoy.
I'm going to
I have one
riff
minute.
on that for a second, just because.
But I want you to turn around to the piano and do that.
No, yeah. Well, it's just
to music, please, Austin. Come on.
to.
You know, every once in a while I think about this, and
He did Walking. Come on.
Well, we haven't really at all mentioned, other than briefly, the counting, the election, it's one of those that, as someone who has basically always felt disgust towards all politicians, regardless, even if I agree with them, I just foundationally think that the type of personality who wants to pursue that automatically is suspect. Oh, am I going to be accompanied right now?
You're being upstage right now. There's a play.
That's interesting, Austin. I think generally Australians have a disdain from politicians, but I can absolutely, because I feel so passionately about it, see a future where in Australia I would get into, I guess, the politics of education. I can see myself running for education reform. I can see that being a thing that a much older Alanah does because I feel so strongly about that system.
Then
But-
my deepest, most non-spiritual prayers that the system doesn't do to you what it does to all other politicians. And take people who are humans and make them subhuman. I say all that because this morning I saw
Subhuman?
at best. I hate them. I really hate them.
Really?
to me-
I would register my disagreement at the word subhuman.
To me,
that's
to me,
revelatory of you than it is of
politicians,
them, though,
at least at
Sure, yeah, no, of course, yeah.
at least federal level politicians,
Okay.
are they are not public servants, which is what the job description is. They're just not. And so I welcome disagreement and challenge, but to me, I look at someone who I even agree with and I say, it's incidental that I agree with you. And in most cases, I don't even think that they agree with me. I think they will say what needs to be said. Anyway, all that point being, I saw on Facebook this morning, somebody wrote, I screenshotted this just so I could read it correctly. They wrote, "I keep making this weird mistake. I hate being an optimist because I keep thinking people are decent." That was their response to watching the elections result. And it really upset me to read that, because I thought, we're not moving the right direction where you look at people who came to a different conclusion than you, and where you go to is they're not decent. It's just too simple. It's too reductive. And I'm not trying to defend Trump or any and I'm making no statements. It's just the idea that you instantly write off tens of millions of people on a fundamentally human level. This is what made me think of it when Troy said, that person was once a kid who had teeth coming in. It's like, let's not strip each other of some basic empathy here.
Austin,
it is
while
far too complicated.
I agree with you on this particular point. Are you not doing the same thing to all politicians?
They are not human. So it's different.
I also think that lets a lot of politicians off the hook. So what the problem I have with what you're saying.
Fair point, but I am
You're leveling them though by saying they're subhuman. Let's accept that as a premise. Although again, not a fan of that. Let's accept.
Hold on.
Accept as a premise that all politicians are subhuman. Right?
I want so badly to continue in this conversation, but I have to bow out again.
You may be excused.
Oh no. Yeah, I honestly think that might be for the best.
But it is. I do want to, and I'm not going to do a fake hang up. Austin is one of my dearest and closest friends, and I value his opinion more than the gold standard. And the beauty of more than the gold standard.
Interesting comparison.
What I will say is that the beauty of our relationship that's predicated upon discourse and being able to disagree with each other, and more importantly, not just go. We've never had a time where we go, "I disagree with you," and that was the end of it. It's always, well, that makes me think differently about this. And I do agree with him in the sense that it's like to be able to look at someone and go, they're a terrible person, even when it disagrees with what he's talking about politicians. I have to be able to go, that person was a baby once. It's like, woof. It is because I have to be a better person. I want to make sure that what I'm doing is being the best person that I can be, even if that person is being the worst person that they can be. Because the reason why that person exists, the reason why that person and I's paths have somehow collided is to be a sparring partner for me. They will make me better. So I want to welcome those people into my life. Because can we not also make them hopefully better? To make them worse is bad for us. To make them better is better for us and them.
Have you ever grown as a person or learned without being challenged, though?
Never. It doesn't exist.
Disagree with me, baby.
Disagree with me, baby.
But that's the thing is I think there's a difference between writing someone off as subhuman or that felt like I was actually attacking Austin's point, which I'm not.
No.
There's a problem.
No, and in faerness, I was being ridiculous.
I know that. No, sorry, I wasn't actually encouraged. I wasn't bouncing off that point. What I was saying was, I guess there's a difference between like when that person says they're very disappointed with humans for being bad humans. That's a judgment, and I think that's okay. I think it's okay to say. I think basically the way to learn is to criticize, and I think it's okay to criticize people who you think have done a terrible thing.
I
don't think that
makes
you less dismissive. You agree with both of us.
I agree with both of you on some things, but I also agree that I now understand more about solitary conspiracy than when I started this conversation, and that's what I'm truly.
It was all worthwhile.
Watch that. Bye.
Bye. So I worry you're letting bad politicians off the hook by kind of bundling them together. Like I think there is a fundamental difference between politicians in terms of how bad they are, I guess. And if you decide all of them are you're not saying all of them are equally bad. You're saying they're all
for sure not
worse than normal people. But like
a career politician, to pursue that, you have to inherently kind of disregard in some cases your own morals. I think in order to be a career politician, you have to make moves that can be almost objectively negative for the people in your community, because you have to play a game where you are literally making decisions that impact everyone.
You have to prioritize tasks
yourself, ultimately, and I could see that being a fair criticism. But again, I can see myself running. It's something I've thought about since I was 15. Is like education is so important, and there are so many things I would reform.
Yeah,
it's also
but you
an
would have to make
endowment of
compromises.
power.
You're right. Like I can understand that as a part of politics. Like you would have to make compromises. I guess my problem is just like there's definitely a difference between Biden and Trump in terms of like
undoubtedly
who's a good person.
Undoubtedly, but I wouldn't turn my back on Biden. Hell
no. I don't think either of them would be a best friend of mine. But like, there's definitely one who's like horrible.
Yeah,
and one who's there's the gradation. I guess
is a better review than I would give any federal level politician, because especially lifetime career politicians.
Right.
You know, it's
which I guess Trump is not, which is like actually part of why a lot of people have voted for him, is that they see him as being a businessman and not a politician, and they hate politicians in the way you do, and that's like a reality of it. Is he is perceived as not being a politician?
Businessman's a very strong word.
I still but even that. So I had a conversation with a Trump supporter like 2 days ago, and it was very civil. I did not argue with this person at all. I was just like, so I guess I was sort of being like, and this was in person, thankfully, not on the internet where it would be a disaster. But I was like, so
that's always the better way to have those conversations.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
I was sort of just like,
yeah.
You like him because he's not a politician. They're like, yes, he's a businessman. And I was like, but he's a failed businessman in that he's had so many bankruptcies or failures in his professional career that was
he's
really
never made a penny. Like he's always lost.
He started
money.
with money and then lost it. And they were like, it doesn't matter though, because the way that he has recovered is that he is still successful. And I was like, well, then what do you mean by successful? And they're like, he's the president. And you're like, okay, but prior to that, I guess the idea is just that despite his business failings,
it's a solid argument.
He is still successful because he's famous. He has all these ventures. He's internationally renowned. So it doesn't matter that he's financially unsuccessful. He is still successful.
It's the classic strong man argument, right? It's the classic, this is a strong man, therefore I support him.
So many voters are single issue voters, and I think the vast majority of Trump's foundation of support came from single issue voters extremely terrified of the economic stability of their life. Trump, and that's why Trump, as loathsome as a statement as it was, he was probably not wrong when he said I could step into the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody.
I still think that's true.
And still get elected. I'm like, it's because if
I tweeted earlier, it turns out you can do it to 233,000 people.
Well, I think the point is, that people. The funny thing is that Trump said that because he thought they love me so much. But I was like, I think he's got the right conclusion for the wrong reasons. It's because if somebody, election night 2016, by bizarre happenstance, I happened to be in the middle of Michigan in a small town, because there was an orchestra that had commissioned a piece of mine, and we'd made all the arrangements long before I had done the math and realized that on election night I would be in a small, formerly factory filled, now everything's covered in rust and looks abandoned area, and I had to drive through a sea of Trump-Pence signs to get there on election night. And having come from LA, where it was like, well, obviously Hillary's going to win. I show up, and I remember looking around and going, I'm not so sure that she's going to win, because I can, and of course, purely anecdotal of just one random little community. But I remember feeling very strongly, this is a community on its last leg, and they don't know. And this is again, part of my political philosophy is I can't stand making messianic figures out of politicians. I much prefer my political leanings are one in which we empower individuals to improve their own lives, because I would never want to entrust my fate to somebody else, even if I think that they could fix it, because in the end, I just don't think anybody should have that much power. And so to me, the idea but I get it. I still get it. I still get people looking to Trump and saying, like, please save us. And I'm like, I would rather help those people save themselves, but I get that they need help. That's the thing.
Let me tell you
that would
about
be my
socialism.
thing. Is like certain communities,
let's
I don't
get this
think
done.
have the ability to just help themselves, and thus they do need assistance from government services.
As of right now,
the reality is that if
development
you
of the
were
system
to
prevents it. Absolutely. I wouldn't.
But
deny
even
that
if you
at
were
all.
to take everyone and empower them to help themselves, that's great until you have to work out sanitation. Because everyone's going to want to. Everyone in
I'm not talking
libertarian
about
utopia, you're going to want.
I'm not advocating some ultra pure libertarian philosophy here. I'm simply
So
saying.
it's just pulling back from government, is what you're saying.
I'm saying yes, and specifically the presidency, specifically the idea that people seem to think that presidents are kings or queens. They have this notion of this person,
which is ironic, of course.
Yeah,
as
I'm
they're
not a fan of that at all.
trying-
Yeah, they're specifically designed not to be, and yet they do
Executive
have,
orders, I didn't really even understand what those were, because I feel like Trump's the first president who's actually used them, and I was like, this motherfucker can just pass whatever they want?
He's
What?
far from the first president to use them.
I
Yeah,
guess
he was the
it's
first to do it
one I've heard about,
proudly.
maybe. But I do also recognize Trump's administration is unique in that it's the first one that has been extremely on social media, which means our relationship to it's very different. And that would be the thing that I would say about the Facebook post that you found, Austin, is I think that our relationship to social media and the way that Twitter forces you to have a take that is hotter than the take you actually have, because something that is more extreme drives engagement. And then that's a problem on YouTube as a platform as well, is that the things that get more extreme get more engagement because people are curious about this headline. And then YouTube literally escalates you. If you were to leave something on autoplay, you would start off on a Ben Shapiro video and then end up on QAnon conspiracy. Like you would just go full in that direction as fast as you can. And I think that is almost radicalized us to hate each other and to be very much in this two-party system that is very aggressive, because you're seeing angry takes retweeted onto your feed and retweeting them. And that's the thing that I always want to tell people not to do is if you see something on Twitter that makes you angry, please don't quote tweet it. You can interact with it, you can reply to it, you don't have to not engage, but why are we broadcasting this thing intentionally? And often the rebroadcast is to just share with everyone else how angry you are about something that is still just giving reach to the original thing that made you mad. And just don't
it's by
quote
design,
tweet
isn't it? They just added quote tweet as default, right? That isn't it? That is designed. Twitter is designed
they want you to
at a
quote tweet
fundamental
now.
level to make you angry.
Yeah, and I feel like that's
we're-
particularly in an election year, is this disparity that we have, I think, is very much fueled by algorithms and engagement on social media that are almost designed to make us hate each other. And the thing that's really bothered me the most about all of the rhetoric surrounding the election, which I did say last night, is I feel like an election should be people in their communities voting to try to make the right choice for their community. And I recognize that different communities have different needs. Like, I'm not saying that in any kind of partisan way. I recognize that there are areas
Basically
in
what
America,
I just said.
There are areas in America that the Republican policies would favor them. And I understand that. Your job as a voter, I would think, is to make the right call for your community. And that's all it should be. But it feels like, again, social media dilutes everything, but I think also very much influences us culturally, has made it feel like it's a sport. Red team good, blue team bad, fuck you, haha, losers. And I'm like, but we're supposed to be voting for ourselves. Like, it doesn't have to be for everyone, but it's supposed to be for at least to help people, not to win. It's such a...
I think what's unfortunately happened
Totally
is that
agree.
we've got a leader, especially on one side, who is actively algorithmically friendly. We have a leader.
That's true.
We have a leader who is and to be fair, this is happening all over the world, and it's definitely the case in the UK. That right now, it's not just about individuals making the best choices for them, which I agree that we should vote for self-interest to an extent. We should vote for at least the self-interest of our communities. I tend to be more in the kind of altruistic, bigger government kind of end of things, but like, yeah, I can agree with that statement definitely. But the issue is that we have leaders who are realizing, either through their own genius or through, in a lot of cases, just narcissism, that they do better the worse they are, or the better they are. Sorry, no, the worse they are.
More
definitely in Trump's
inflammatory.
Oh yeah, Trump is
Like,
good
to the
at
extent
social
that you
media,
have a
is the
leader-
reality. He is skilled at Twitter.
He's astonishingly good at it,
Yeah.
and that's terrifying, because the statements like, this is not kind of a, well, we have our views, they have their views situation. You have one leader running for president who is actively, as we record this, encouraging people to stop counting the votes. That's not a disagreement about the ideas of how best to improve
But
America.
also the massive attacks on the free press are like things that you do not want your leader to do. Even if you're not happy with mainstream media, you never want someone in a position of power to, on a massive scale, be trying to attack journalistic outlets. That is always a giant red flag, because it means that you have a leader who is across the board trying to influence people not to trust the truth. And that's really scary, even if they aren't all perfect.
In Europe, we have lessons about those kind of leaders. In Europe, we're taught how to spot those kind of leaders.
I'm not trying to say that all the
there's a
media here is
history.
perfect, because that's part of the problem, is like some of the US media is they do just
Oh, yeah, I think
make a bunch of
media-
shit up, but it's still
media is
more
horrible.
concerning to me that you would have a president who is like excluding people from events, refusing to answer questions, and publicly trying to dismantle them. Is like, that's fucked up. We don't want this to happen. It's just scary
I totally
shit.
agree. No, I totally agree. That's why, to me, because that tribalism is so baked into us as a social primate, like it is just hardwired. I don't see how it could be possibly teased out of us in some way, at least not this millennium.
The way it's historically worked is information. Is the more access to a free press we have, the more access to a flow of information and ideas we have, the better off ultimately democracy is. The problem is right now is we have a very gameable channel for communication. Like, there is in theory there are absolute freedoms, but we do have algorithms, as Alanah says, that funnel you down awful rabbit holes of just misinformation. So it is something that humanity's
Well,
going to
and
have
the
to
other way
figure
around.
out. We are talking largely about symptoms here.
I think people say things that they don't even necessarily believe for a social media algorithm, because it'll get more engagement the more inflammatory it is, and then they just keep repeating that pattern because they get the engagement, which is an endorphin boost, and you feel like you've accomplished something that you just keep getting worse and worse and worse. I think so I think about this quite frequently, and especially where an election's concerned, is I'm like, I think we fucked up and we're too far gone and we don't know what we've created. Like, I think that social media is too far, and I say this as someone who is very on social media, that we made something, and we always talk about how robots are going to control us one day. They already are. Everyone's just completely oblivious to it, and it's really fucking scary. Like, I don't know what's going to
And they're
happen.
stupid robots. That's the thing that gets me. Is these algorithms are not clever. They're not even intentionally steering towards specific political outcomes. They're not. There is no plan. All it is engagement. All they care about is engagement. And yes, stuff that makes you angry, or stuff that upsets you, or stuff that feels new. is very engaging. That's game designers know all this stuff because that's how we design games. Is to frustrate you and to pull you towards new lessons. And we like learning as human beings. We really like to find out stuff. So what the algorithm favors in terms of like YouTube or social media is new information, and it doesn't have any kind of favoring for whether that information is true or verified,
but also,
or based on anything.
But isn't it also, this is kind of directly contradicting that. I feel like it's also very fair to say that it's not that we like learning new information compared to we like having the beliefs that we have confirmed, regardless of truth, are any affirmation, especially in the form of, oh, here are people who feel like me. And that to me is what social media has. Part of the danger of it with regard to politics is it's very easy to almost instantaneously, because of, like you said, dumb algorithms that are just very mindlessly coalescing people into sort of perpetual motion machines of ideological reinforcement. People just end up having their voice echoed back at them in deafeningly loud blaring sirens, where they don't even know. And the more you engage with it, the more you get walled off from counterpoints.
Well, that's where we enter into like intellectual fast food. If I'm hungry, I know I'm meant to eat like a really good, well balanced meal, but I also know that I can open up an app and have a pizza here in 20 minutes, right? And it's like, and I feel like this is true of us as humans. We like short routes to the endorphin rush. We like short routes to the physical needs taken care of. And I do think with the intellectual stuff is the same. I think, yes, we want new information, we want to learn, but we also as a species really likes easy answers.
And confirmation bias.
Echo throughout human
really
history.
like confirmation bias.
We like to get to the absolute knowledge as quickly as possible. And it actually requires a certain amount of intellectual rigor, which we all spend our lives learning. And I'm definitely not placing myself as I definitely like the easy answers a lot as well. But we try and teach ourselves and learn to be better. And a big part of that is learning to not get the quick fix, not get the quick answer to a question, to actually want to go out and investigate. And I think that's a big thing that we need to teach our kids. We need to learn, as a society, teach people how to learn. And I think that's something that we've let ourselves down on in the past, because historically it's not and now as well, it never serves the people in power for you to be educated.
No, they hate it.
It serves. It's really not good. I mean, educated up to the point where you're profitable.
That's perfect testimony to my earlier point. That's why I don't trust them, because they are incentivized to have an ill-educated electorate. Like, the very fact that incentive for them exists means that their motives are automatically suspect. Now, there might be some that are really trying their best, but they are incentivized to just say, you know what? Less information for these people will make them easier to persuade. And I know I'm doing the right thing, and all it takes is to persuade them to just let me go and do the right thing. I'm like, well, boy, that makes me nervous.
I think there's a difference between I get what you're saying. I think there's a difference between like a systemic bias that is encouraging. There's definitely an impetus in the halls of power to achieve what I'm saying. But I do think there's a difference between those systemic biases and those systemic structures that play with power in that way, and the individuals within that system. I don't buy into your central conceit that, like, I think you're describing systemic problems, but you're personifying to the people in the system rather than the individual. I think the people are separate from the system in that political situation. There are bastards, but I'm sure there's also a lot of very good people in that situation. And yes, they're incentivized by the system, but
sometimes good people
I'm
can still
incentivized
get
by
into a shitty
capitalism
system.
to treat players very.
It doesn't.
Well, yeah,
if you're a good person in a bad system,
I'm
it
incentivized by
doesn't make you a bad
capitalism to
person.
treat players very badly, but I choose not to, right? So I don't think I'm better than politicians would be. Like,
and I'll just say
you can have
again,
a system that encourages behaviors.
I will say again, I was being deliberately exaggerating to say they're all awful subhuman. I am saying, in fact, what you just said.
So
you were having a hot take in order to influence
Engagement.
algorithms. Weren't you,
here's
admit it.
I fully admit it. Bring on the views. I was.
Oh God!
I was saying.
The comments are going to be amazing.
I think of it like a filter. If I have if I'm pouring water through a filter, and the filter is full of garbage, all water passing through it will be full of garbage afterward. And the water going in might be clean or it might not be, but all of it afterward will be unclean. That's
not how filters work. I'm sorry, 1 second. Say the analogy again.
Well, I'm not. A filter. Like there's a
Doesn't water come out of a filter clean?
there's a what's the phrase? What's the
That's not how filters work.
You know what? Well, you know what I mean, though.
I
like,
do
if
know
have
what
a
you mean,
Faulty
but
You
filter.
mean
Mike's
it's
also right.
like it's you. No, honestly, I was
I
going for
think
the easy laugh. I know
a
exactly
strainer,
what
a
you
strainer, a strainer.
Yes.
Yeah.
Let's say I have a strainer that is utterly loaded in bacteria, and I am pouring
Yeah.
water through it. I can have bacterially infected water or clean water. It will all come out having been infected, regardless of its starting state. That is how I, very broadly
I
speaking,
understand what you're saying,
regards
but I
politics.
also I feel
Dirty
like
pipes, yeah.
that
Yeah.
if someone who is well intentioned, as I would consider myself to be, wants to get into politics, it doesn't inherently have to make them a bad person, because we need good people to want to get into politics. Like, what would be your solution? Like, would you throw your hands up and be like, well, everyone who's in politics is bad and that's the way it is? Or is there a solution to encouraging good people to maintain their good virtue, which obviously is very subjective, while getting into politics?
Here is it's a two-part answer, because there's the solution that is the fantasy, and like, meaning like in an ideal world, you could do it. It would be like this, versus how you get there in reality. Obviously the latter, I'm far more murky, but like, to your question, you feel passionately about education reform, rather than going through the machine and all the compromises, the Mr. Smith goes to Washington type compromises that immediately are beset upon you in order to even get to a place of having a platform to even begin to work on your mission. I would rather you, go get a grant or go get investors to build the city on the hill yourself and prove it, and say, here are like, let's say it's very specific. Like,
when you have to make compromises to get those investors, I don't like.
Undoubtedly, but I'm saying I would rather someone who goes off and actually does the thing, rather than try to coerce people into doing the thing. Is intrinsically more appealing to me.
Approach education reform without being in the system.
Well, it depends. I guess it depends specifically on what we mean with education reform. Like because that's a very broad subject. But that's why I'm trying to speak in abstract, which is, I recognize, is deeply flawed. I'm just saying I would rather than you have to work through the system, I would much rather that you have the ability to influence and to build the kind of thing that you're talking about outside of the system. That is to me in that the
kind of like a mid-century Walt Disney futurist kind of vibe. Is that where you're kind of coming from?
Well,
the idea, like,
I think the attitude is, instead of becoming a politician and trying to reform education, you're telling me to go start my own schools. In
the most reductive way,
yes. Yeah.
Sure. And that's where I recognize that in reality it's not that simple. That's why I tried to separate the two. Like, the hypothetical perfect world, in my estimation, I recognize is nowhere near, and it would take.
It would be illegal. They'd be like, you can't just start a school without being on the rules of the schools that we have in place.
Yeah, exactly.
So what would be the real world version of that, Austin? What would be like sorry, not taking the piss, but to the compromise? What's the version that fits?
I don't want to pretend to have the answer there. That's part of why it leaves me with such existential dread, is because there may not be a satisfactory answer there. For me, like, satisfying to me, to feel like I want someone like Alanah to feel deeply empowered to make the world a better place, and to take as little moral compromise in the process needed to get there. And the way the system is currently designed, the maximum influence requires the maximum moral compromise. And I would love for that not to be the case. I wish I knew the answer. I don't pretend to be an expert. The problem I have is that there's a lot of other people that don't know the answer, that are very convincing that they do, and end up with a lot of power, and they don't. I mean, look at Trump. He's a perfect example. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And it's like, even the very fact of buying into that sales pitch makes me.
You're
nervous.
right.
It's very attractive, right? It's a very attractive answer.
When I think about it in my head, I'm like, sure, I walk into the court with my pitch that says we need to change our testing so that it does not favor children who specifically have this type of learning. and cater to a variety of different learning styles. But then I would probably get people be like, can you shut up? Unless I had gone out to dinner with a number of them and made some kind of connection and guaranteed a vote. And that is, I think, because there are already people who function that way in the system, that anyone who doesn't does have to play that game. I think you are ultimately right.
Let's use that as just a hypothetical example. If we lived in a world where the government, whether we're talking local or federal, I don't know how it works in Australia, but like, let's say there are not governmentally mandated testing standards. Like the government has its, like, say there are government schools that have their government standards, but that that there's no real blockade to forming non-government private schools, charter schools, that kind of thing. Let's just say that instead of you having to go to a court or go to a hearing or a council or a whatever and say, I want to approach learning styles differently. That's why, to me, you having the ability to go build a school and just prove it, and everyone, and then it's like year after year, turns out you're right, and your kids are doing fucking awesome. And
so is it kind of like a free market kind of approach?
It's
the idea that like it's a free market of ideas, basically.
It's an intellectual free market idea, sure. And I'm not, again, I know that, one step into that discussion, you encounter landmines, and I don't pretend to have. Well, my concern is
that I worry actually that we're weirdly, like, you're presuming Alanah's a better person than I am in the structure there, because
I'm not,
because if Alanah's, well,
I'm presuming that if she sucks, her idea will fail.
But so will the kids at her school.
I recognize that's why I do think parents ought to have the choice. That's why I am a big advocate of school choice in that regard, for that reason. I think that as a parent, they will do their best to assess the difference. And this, because I see but
are they best equipped to make those decisions?
For their family and their kids? Over a bureaucrat?
Yeah, well, would they have the best? You're presuming that parents would have the best idea? And by the way, I'm not arguing against. I'm just trying to clarify your position. So parents are the best judges of what education is best for their children.
Whether or not they're the best judges, I think that I personally feel a moral obligation to empower the maximum decision-making power in the hands of whoever has the most consequence of whatever that decision is. So if I'm a parent and my kid is going to be taken to a school against my will versus my ability to choose, I think it's fair that they have the ability to choose. They may not be the best judge. That's going to be parent by parent.
Well, right. And on the flip side of that,
they suffer the consequences, though.
But so does the rest of society. So if you have a board of people, and this isn't something I even think, this is just something that's very interesting to talk about. If you have a board of people who are choosing the best schools and are deciding, like, based on research or education or whatever else, this child would do best at this school. Like a kind of government. This
like
child
a kind
does
of government,
best at
like
this
a group
school.
of people coming together to solve problems. Yeah.
That in theory, like, that system can't be perfect. Yeah, maybe you could vote them in. Then you would have children at these schools who are placed there specifically with the best performance in mind, rather than parents who may be completely uneducated putting their kid in the completely wrong school. And thus we have all of these
bad
children
people who don't care,
who are not, I think society is worse off when people are uneducated. You can also have parents who don't want their kids to go to school, which is why that's a government mandate. I mean, it's not a take, though. I'm literally spitting out a hypothetical of, like, how complicated these kinds of things get. But because there are also parents who are like, I don't think my kid should go to school. I don't think my kid needs to be a part of that system at all. Like,
and also, who's picking up, like, this is I feel like most of these roads, like, don't get me wrong, I definitely don't want to come across as I think, like, the current systems of government in the UK and Australia and America are, like, the best solution to the problem, because they're definitely not. But at the same time, like, I feel like every conversation where we go down the individualistic approach, you end up inventing government. You end up going, well, there should be some kind of rules about what schools should teach. There should be some shared kind of base minimum, and we should establish that. And, well, we don't want people we don't want, like, someone just dictating that. We're going to have like, people make decisions about, and you end up just inventing government. It feels like government is kind of the end point of this conversation. In most times I end up having this conversation.
I'm not anti-government. I just think that a parent in this, using this very specific example, and again, nothing sways me more than data. And I would happily pivot my opinion the moment there is an empirical demonstration
Of what? Sorry, of
this
this
any
model not
of
working.
any contention. I mean, literally, I'm just
So
broadly.
there's some
speaking.
interesting. So some data you should look at is in the UK we don't have absolutely free schools, but we do have there's some stuff that's come in the last, I think, decade or so, where there are these schools that are run by parents groups, right, and they get to choose their own curriculums to an extent. And you're starting to see educational outcomes coming out there. And what's happening is some of them are fucking incredible and are absolutely outperforming the state schools. But a lot of them are run by Mirror Universe Alanah, and have really screwed over a bunch of kids. And it's like I don't know why, I don't actually know what the ratio is of like those two groups.
I would
Although
love
you'll
to
notice
learn
when I
more
said it,
about
I
that.
applied my own bias because I said some for the group that were good and a lot for the others.
Yeah.
So you can see already my own internal biases are coming into how I describe
Sure.
this. But that would be an excellent thing for you to go and look at the
I
numbers.
feel like this is a Black Mirror episode in the making. Is like, do we educate people or let people educate themselves, and what happens? Like, how much control do you have over trying to have an educated society? Like, I think that is actually a really interesting, like, ethical question mark. Like,
I'm gonna make the video game.
That's where for me, it's all very interesting, and obviously I'm, as someone who has benefited tremendously from, I went to a public school that was a very good public school, and obviously I went to university after
public
that.
school. In America, public school means free, right? Like government funded.
Yeah, it's funded through. It's
in
funded
the UK,
through,
public school means private school, which is really stupid.
oh, strange.
Interesting.
So I went to a comprehensive, which is like what you would call a public school. So it's just I just had to double check that my understanding there. So you went to a state funded school.
There are private schools that are like, like high schools that are almost like little mini universities. I did not go to one of those.
Yeah, we have those too. I didn't either. We're all publicly
We call them
educated.
public schools just to confuse Americans.
Yeah, and the thing is, the school I went to was phenomenal, and I feel very, very grateful. So I am very open. But for example, one of my closest friends growing up was this kid who his parents moved very slightly, and it put him in a different district, and he had to go to an objectively lesser school. He still went to a very good school. I shouldn't play politics between, because schools are already rivals. But not that I'm naming names, but he went to a school that was not as good due to a relocation, and he really wanted to stay at our school, and he couldn't.
Why was the other school less good? Was it like in a poorer area, or
presumably? I don't know. I mean, I don't think it was a school in a particularly low-income area, but it was also smaller. Like our school was huge, and it really benefited from that because there were a lot of sports, a lot of arts, because the population body of the students was so huge. And anyway, I'm all this is being overly reductive. I fully acknowledge that. But to me, the idea that someone who doesn't know you is basically saying, I know what's best for your kid. There may be a scenario where that is in fact correct. But I also think to rob parents of the right to have a say, I just don't see how that's different than, not to make this all the more inflammatory.
do it.
You know where I'm going. You know where I'm going.
Say it.
I don't see that as different as the pro-life, pro-choice debate. Like
different angle.
At the end of the road, I have a real hard time with the idea of empowering a personal decision away to disempowering someone from a really massively intimate and consequential personal decision. And I see how a parent raises their kid is very similar to that. Like,
I understand.
Like that's the kid is not state property. You know what I mean? And now again, if it was let's say that after a few decades of the kind of educational system that you were just describing a minute ago showed that just by a ludicrous margin that state-run education was just always better, then I consider me convinced. Like I don't have like a philosophical.
Would you apply the same standards to the other side of the argument? Would you say if you said so you'd be convinced if state schools were always better? Would you be? So is the requirement on the other side as well that the non-state schools would have to always be better for you to think that was the better outcome? Because no system will always be better, right? Like, there's never going to be like a black or white situation.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah.
So what would be the stipulation? So if the state version was on the whole, I don't know, an average of some kind, we don't need to get into mean mode or mean, but like,
I know exactly.
If the state schools on the whole had the best outcomes for the students, then that's what you mean, right? That's the
like let's say
you're talking modally.
Yeah, a given educational model bore out subsequent success in life for the students. Like that would be like those
on average, though, rather than on an individual basis, right?
Yeah, it would have to be. I would think.
Yeah.
That's why, and that's why I'm like, if it was overwhelming, if it was one of those that it was overwhelming, if it was a real mixed bag, then I would almost certainly default back to the position of, then this should be left to the parents. Because if my kid gets trapped in a state-run school that's shitty, I want to be able to try to find another place for them to go. Like as a parent, I would care that they not get screwed by the system. But if the system was just tried and true and demonstrating spectacular results time and again, then I would happily shut up about the whole thing. That's why I have a real hard time. I have a real hard time disenfranchising people of choice, basically.
I completely understand
in their life.
I think this is like I don't think there's any solution. Like, if my take or my stance is I want people to be as educated as they possibly can, even that could be considered subjective. So, like, one of my issues with the education system was that it was designed for me, and thus I didn't have to try very hard because I can write a hell of an argumentative essay. So I could write a convincing essay about anything without having to study it whatsoever and get an A. But people who aren't, whose brains work more mathematically or don't have as much literary strength, it's really difficult for them. Which means that even the grading system is absurd. So there are so many things that I just didn't learn because I didn't have to, because I can write convincingly. Like, that I was just like, fine. Like, I just cheated my way through high school. And I feel like that's an example of something that you could argue is still subjective. It's like, well, but those are still the classes that you needed to take ancient history for some reason, to write an argumentative essay about the Egyptians for some reason. And we're very glad that you did that to get your A so that you can go on to be a writer. But I didn't learn anything. I was just like, I will bullshit my way through all of this. And it was completely fine. Other people can't bullshit their way through it, and then they get lower grades across the board because they aren't being taught the skills to be able to do that, or their individual skills as an individual child are not being recognized. And from the perspective I have, if my thesis is that people learn differently and have different skills just inherently, then you could, in theory, make a case that I'm arguing for homeschooling, which I'm not. But you could be like, well, if it's that individual, then you should have people be individually taught by their parents. And I think there's a case for that too. Like, this is... Because you'd have
to make kind of compromises and work within an existing system in order to improve the outcomes for everyone. Yeah,
I do think though that is getting at a lot of the same basic point though, because I completely agree that some students will learn amazingly in one environment and terribly in another.
Yeah,
and I think that any system which overly, inflexibly says this is how it's done is gonna screw lots of kids, and that's not okay with me. And that's why I'm like, if it turns out I have a kid who's, severely dyslexic, and the system is just like, it is just stacked against that person. But then there's another school that's like, we are built for that. We get it. We can help your kid. We know. It's like the idea that I would be legally barred from taking them there is, I feel like it's a disservice to the kid and to the parent.
I would certainly like to see more specialist schools.
Wouldn't it be cool to engage with the system and make the first school better at education?
For what it's worth, that's what I do.
The Alanah, the airdrop Alanah in approach, basically. Like, let's get Alanah into government to fix the government school, right? Rather than
that is what I
would think
I would do.
And that's why I do differentiate between local and federal politics for exactly that reason. I would love less federal control, more local control, because if people collectively vote on a thing and decide to do it, just because we call that government, I don't have a philosophical problem with government. It's not like I have an allergy to the labels that we give things or the system at all. I care only about the outcome. I only care what yields the best results. And I do think that when things tend to be more decentralized, and tend to be more local. Sure, local government, state in the U.S. sense of it, state government.
This may be where it differs, because I'm from a country where, like, we don't essentially have a federal government because our country is the size of one of your states.
It's the same for me.
Like, my perspective is going to be very different to you
Yeah.
on federal, because I just never encountered that level of I guess, bureaucracy.
I feel like most of our education is state controlled rather than federal controlled, but I actually don't know if that's true. I know that we all have a different grading system.
We definitely do. There
State-wise.
are federal standards, and then I think the majority of what a student encounters are state standards. There are California standards that are different from. I grew up in Colorado, that kind of thing. But to your point, Mike, in terms of, I definitely disentangle the fantasy from the reality, and an example of putting my money where my mouth is. For the last 13 years, I've been on the board and actively fundraised for an education nonprofit that goes to local schools.
Cool.
And we install music education in schools that long ago cut those programs. And these are all government schools. We do have one or two charter schools, but our whole point is to go into underserved communities, low income schools where they cut music 30 years ago. And we're like, hey, the data show that all of your test scores go up when the kids have music K through 5. Like, the goal is not to create an army of musicians. The goal is to improve neuroplasticity.
But what if you did? Have you thought about that?
Well, that's not bad for the world either. But
that's I want to see that Broadway show, right? Let's definitely
an army of musicians.
Yeah, sign me up.
Yeah.
So it's one of those where
I like that. That's a credit to you, man. Like, that's a credit to you that you do that stuff. And I should say, actually, I think you've done. I think a project you did with me, you actually got you got paid into that charity, I believe, which is. Like, I know that you put your money where your mouth is on that, which is cool.
I believe in it, and I recognize that we deal with because L.A., the city of Los Angeles, the actual borders of the city of Los Angeles are not nearly as wide as what we call L.A. Because Burbank, where I am, has a mayor, Glendale has a mayor, Santa Monica has a mayor.
Burbank isn't a part of L.A.
Burbank is its own city. The city of Burbank is its own city.
What?
Yeah, like, I pay city taxes to Burbank. I live in Los Angeles County, and there are county laws that apply to the county of Los Angeles, which encompasses the vast majority of what we call
So it's
LA.
like a New York situation, right? Where the county is also the same as the
I don't
city,
actually
right?
know how it works, because in New York you refer to the areas of the city as the boroughs, and I don't know if, for example, Queens and Brooklyn, I don't know if they have a mayor. But it's just my ignorance, because I don't know what a borough means relative to a city, but I do know that the city of Burbank is a city and has its own town hall, and there is a mayor of Burbank, and it's not far from here.
It's Mickey Mouse.
And well, actually, funny you say that, kind of related. Where Universal Studios is, if you look on the addresses, it's Universal City. That is actually its own city. Universal Studios sits on land that is designated as its own sovereign city, separate from Los Angeles, and which is like a bizarre. I don't know who the mayor of Universal City is, but
it's also where every TV actor I've ever met lives, in Universal City. I guess because there's just so many studios around there.
Universal
it seems
City,
to be like where all of those people live.
Well, I don't think so, because I think Universal City is literally essentially the border of Universal Studios.
It is. Your Studio City is what you're talking about, Mike.
Studio City,
which is right next to Universal.
Right.
Yeah,
which is right next.
A very Hollywood name. Point being,
I've got Universal Studio confused. That's what it is.
Point being that we interact with city officials on the local level with our nonprofit all the time. We'll have a meeting with the Burbank mayor, and it's like, hey, great, here's someone who has to live with the consequences of their choices. I'm all for that. I like it. And I laud those people. I think those people actually are public servants, because it's not like they're going to make millions of dollars through corrupt backroom dealings in all likelihood. Like, they are really there to serve their community, because they live in that community.
Honestly, Austin, when I'm thinking about this, again, this is a thing that I've felt like it's not impossible for me that one day I will end up in education. But this is a thing that you've made me think about in a way that I've never thought about, that I probably naively thought, it's cool, I have all these ideas that I'm very passionate about, I would work on getting data that would support my ideas, and I would present them, and then we fix education. But it wouldn't. Realistically, you're right, it would not work that way, because the system does not allow it to work that way, which is a reality of politics that I do agree. You have to bend in ways that I probably wouldn't even be capable of bending. Like, maybe I would just fail.
My ideal scenario is that you would be faced with moral compromise you would be unwilling to meet, and then and like
I would. I'm a stone wall. I'd be like, fuck no, and then I would be useless. Like,
here's a question for you. Let's say that you go hunting for that data and the data reveals that you're wrong. What would you do in that? Like, let's just say that your model, there have been studies and there have been analyses, and the idea in your head says, actually, they've tried that a bunch of times. It never worked. Out of curiosity, I know I'm being very vague, so it's not much to go from. But just
I don't have a hypothesis, so I don't feel like there is a. It's a terrible sentence to say, but I don't feel like there is a thing to be wrong about. My current stance is that
America, the sentence.
I don't have an informed like thing that I have a drive for. All I know is that the way that primary school currently functions is based on tradition and not based on data. It is based on this is how we do it because this is how we've always done it. And I know that much. It's not based on this is what produces the best results. This is how children grow the best. This is how they become the more educated citizens. This is how they have more of a desire to learn, etc. So I feel like that is my issue. I do not have a hypothesis I could bring you as to here is what my solution is. It would be a situation where I would study up on that extensively in advance.
I see. Yeah.
And then figure it out when I actually approached that. Like, I know that it's imperfect, again, because I managed to cheat my way through school. I didn't even barely attend in my last 2 years of high school because I was like, I don't need to, because I can write a really good fucking essay. And it was like, that was all I had to do. I wrote book reports and got A's on books I didn't read because I'm very convincing as a writer. I was just like, this is like even while I was going through that, I was like, this is horseshit and the system is super broken because I can do this and this kid I'm friends with can't. Like, it's just not right. And I think that was even the experience with my sister, who learns very differently to me, in that, like, I was helping her do a lot of her essays, which means she wasn't inherently learning, but it's because the system did not work with the way that she learns or the way that she expresses the things that she has learned. So I would rewrite her essays for her to help her pass. I'm like, if we have something that has to do this because the system is catered to someone who can learn in the way that I do, the system is broken and it's unfair. And I watched that happen with like literally 2 siblings in real time. I'm like, something's not right here. That said, I probably should have attended high school a little bit more because I'm really bad at math. So,
I mean, in fairness, that's a perfectly fair and an honest opinion. The reason I asked is because you said I would basically have my pitch and then go look for the data to support it. And just that's like...
Oh, I definitely mean that the other way around.
Okay,
yeah,
beautiful.
I
was going to say...
No. I would figure out... I guess if my pitch is like very broadly... I think the system needs to change. But then I would be like, what needs to change and why? It would be a massive, like, figuring out that data, not the other way around.
And funny enough, my high school experience mirrored it through the lens of music, exactly what you just said. We had this school student, or, the 4,000 students in the high school. And so as a result, we had like 4 orchestras, and the top level one was quite good for a high school orchestra. And they welcomed me with open arms from age 13 or 14. And for all 4 years of high school, I got to write music for them, practice conducting. By the time I went to university at age 18, I had spent so much more time in front of real orchestras than all my colleagues by far, because I had the luck of this environment. Yeah. And I, naive 18-year-old, I had no idea how insanely unusual that was.
Yeah.
And so when I went out into the world and I started meeting people who, they couldn't even fathom the idea of a school orchestra, never mind multiple, where they can actually be competitive, where you like audition and the top one is like the really good, like most of these kids are probably going to go be music majors in college kind of thing. That's what motivated me to say, I don't think that my situation should never have been rare. My whole career is predicated on something that was dumb luck. That's not okay with me.
Yeah.
Like, I'm grateful for that luck and I will capitalize on that luck personally and professionally, but also I feel a debt to society to say, I don't want my case to be this weird outlier. I am happy, and I will happily, just to circle it back and to make it abundantly clear so I don't get strawman to death in the comments on this one.
Nobody's listening to the podcast anymore. It's fine. They tuned out half an hour ago.
It's just us now.
We stopped recording when Troy left.
Yeah, I stopped recording 40 minutes ago.
Probably for my benefit, but I just, to be clear, I would happily work with anybody that wants to make the change. And if they are a government employee or elected official, or they're private entrepreneur or whatever, my number one mantra is I care about the results. When it comes to education, I care what makes kids the better off. When it comes to poverty, it comes to what makes people able to escape poverty and stay out of poverty, et cetera, et cetera. I don't actually care what the methods are. I care about the results. And
I wish this was all the conversations about politics. I wish this was how politics was discussed. Because essentially, like, I think you and I we have a lot of differences in opinion of the methodology.
How to get there.
But in terms of outcomes, like, you don't want to hurt children, you know.
That's what I was going to say. It's like, well, Hitler significantly decreased the unemployment rate in Germany because he killed people.
He also substantially increased the mortality rate, which I think is not not a perfect offset.
But what I'm saying is, I think this is the kind of political conversation that.
Thank you for bringing up Hitler. We hadn't quite hit that.
Yeah, we hadn't got there. I thought Austin was going to earlier, but he went with
abortion. I went with a much better take.
Which no, there's that's the right kind of conversation to be having, like one that stems from a shared desire to fix problems, and I feel like
as opposed to achieve
as
power.
Been said on this.
That's fundamentally why
I think power sometimes is a path to solving problems, but I take your point. But like I think it becomes a sport, and when it's a sport, we've lost something.
That's my problem right now, and I don't know what to do about it. Let me know if anyone knows how to fix social media, because I think we got problems.
Just get Jack Dorsey on the line, Heron. No.
Oh, can we not?
All right. If anyone's still listening, an hour and 45 minutes in.
God bless you.
Thanks for listening to our video game podcast.
Who won, people of the future? Who won? I'd like to sleep
tonight. For what it's worth, I just
won?
Refreshed 538, and it hasn't moved since we started. So
there you go.
Still, Biden has more, but neither have enough to win. As a final comment, I will say, as my gratitude to you both and to Troy in absentia, I we all love doing this, but I will say, earlier today, Sony published a blog post that I wrote where we revealed some heretofore unrevealed stuff about the Pathless. And out of curiosity, in the video preview of it, I went and looked at just perusing the comments as I always do. And there were a handful of people in there who said, like, I'm excited for this or whatever, but I never heard of this except for Play, Watch, Listen. I never heard of him, meaning me. They had never heard of because separate from this. And that made me smile. I was like, wow, I didn't really expect that. I guess just statistically it would be likely there'd be someone, but it was very sweet to see someone make a point of saying, hey, this is cool and I'm here for this reason. So as my gratitude to you guys and Alanah, of course, for forming the idea. Next time, I'm going to say this out loud so that we all hold each other accountable because
great. That always works.
I know.
Yeah.
But because I still get
Don't
asked.
Impinge my individual right to talk about whatever I want, Austin. Sorry, go on.
I wouldn't dream of it. I finished The Good Place. And I still get ever since that came up a month ago or whatever, I get still tweets of like, yeah, video games. Have you finished the show? I have finished the show.
Special.
And I would so love to finally get into it.
Isn't the Pathless coming out soon as well, Austin? Because I'd love to talk about the Pathless. I think that game looks awesome.
It comes out 1 week from tomorrow.
And Mike is finishing The Last of Us Part 2 this week.
He bloody isn't.
I think that's a lost cause.
of all the weeks to play a game that is that harrowing, I think this week I might play some lighter fare.
I think Troy's going to be upset by the kinds of conversations we had here in his absence, and I sort of
he'd
feel
have
bad.
loved to be here.
He would have enjoyed this one. It's a real bummer. We'll miss him. R.I.P. See you next week, everyone.